Thanks so much, Howard. Hope you're not getting sick of my face. Now we're entering to the panel discussions, and if I can call back Andy and Howard and introduce you all to two additional speakers for this evening. We have the pleasure of Carl-Johan Falk, the site manager of CityGen E.ON, who will also be joining our panel. He's the operational site manager, having been operations manager for the CHP Malmö in Sweden, which is a 450 megawatt of power and 400 megawatts of heat. So that, I think, probably, apart from the large 750 megawatt Chevron thing, pretty much dominates every small-scale heat network in the UK. And the deputy site manager for the building phase of the CHP Malmö, and he has a master's in science and mechanical engineering. So thank you very much, Carl, for joining us. I'd also like to introduce David Maxwell from Sustainable Development Capital Limited. David's an investment analyst within SDCL's investment advisory business, focusing on energy efficiency sector in the UK and Europe. He does financial modelling, sourcing and analysing investment opportunities, transactions, negotiating and executing, managing relationships both financial, legal and technical. I did laugh about the managing legal, David. Please say nice things about me. Project managing and monitoring investment activity and reporting to investors. He's played a key role in SDCL's growth in the energy efficiency investment program, and as many of you may know, SDCL was one of two appointed to manage the non-domestic energy efficiency fund as part of the UK GI project. This part of this evening is open questions to the floor, and for me to ask a couple of, as Clive likes to call it, truth or myth points. Clive did say if you found these truth or myth points insightful, they're all his ideas. If you find them either controversial or completely pointless, it's all down to me. So my first truth or myth is to Carl. Given what we've talked about tonight, given the various policy, stakeholder and reward disconnects, it's exceptionally difficult and unattractive to extend a heat network beyond its dedicated site. Is that a truth or is that a myth?
I can't see that being a problem for us to extend our network because CityGen is a part of E.ON. E.ON owns the asset. E.ON also owns the network. And unfortunately, there is no other network in the neighborhood or anywhere near to our network. So it's not a problem that we're restricted by any regulation. That's not what kind of hinders our network to grow. It's there are other challenges to overcome, I would say.
So do you think in CityGen's case, given your location and density, that it is possible to extend your heat network, that you can overcome property challenges, you can overcome some of the other stakeholder challenges?
I guess I have to say yes, of course. We're constantly reviewing our opportunities to grow. At the moment we have spare capacity in our network and also in our production facilities. So still the challenges that we're facing for growth are more because of commercial reasons and developers not really used to district heating, maybe not, they might lack experience, knowledge, or sometimes even competence. So I think we're bringing in a quite new product, and that meets some, I wouldn't say resistance, but at least I think it's more a commercial issue than a legal issue that would stop our growth of our network.
Thanks, Carl. My next truth or myth is to David. Howard has any additional insights, that would be great. David, it takes too long, it costs too much money to structure an economically viable and bankable city or town district-wide heat network, and therefore you're far better off investing your money into funding heat schemes that serve dedicated sites.
Yeah, I mean, As to whether it's a truth or myth, I would probably say a bit of both. I think that, talking about it from the point of view of our mandate with the Green Investment Bank, funding or part funding a district heating scheme on a sort of a citywide or a regional-wide basis is within the remit of what we can invest in. There are a couple of examples where we're looking at investing in projects of this nature on a larger scale than just site-specific. So certainly in terms of appetite from us as investors and looking at the commercial risks associated with it, it's a myth. I think I just acknowledge that there are a lot of risks associated, as you've listed tonight, with this type of contract on a sort of citywide or larger scheme. For example, the owner operator goes bust and the various property rights issues and that sort of thing. I suppose in response really to the risks that you listed earlier, I would sort of look at it in a different way potentially as well, where we're acting on behalf of the Green Investment Bank, not only financing but also developing projects of this nature. We go through a lot of due diligence, and that due diligence covers off a lot of these risks that you've mentioned. So, for example, the likelihood that the operator or the owner might go bust, that's something that we look into quite intensively through the process. So I guess what I'm saying is, as part of that due diligence process, that can give a lot of comfort to the off-taker or to the user of that energy that is being generated. So in many ways, our involvement in this kind of project can work to mitigate some of the risks that we've talked about tonight. But I would also say that, it's a lot easier to get our heads around, a lot easier and less expensive to due diligence project where it's just site-specific. But perhaps by financing and developing a few site-specific projects of using technologies that we've talked about tonight, that will help to drive the market forward. That will help to sort of stimulate regulation by the government. So I see it as a kind of building block process where potentially the role of people such as ourselves investing in these projects is to look at the wider schemes, but to start investing in smaller schemes and to build up the market.
And how would you have anything?
Yeah, do I need to use that one?
This is going to be a camera rather than you.
Yeah, if I'd known there was going to be a camera, I'd have had a haircut. So that's for site-specific schemes. For the people who are usually investing in site-specific schemes are energy companies, because they want energy companies like E.ON, and those investments are extremely secure, in my view, because they will only invest the amount of, if it's a new development, they will only invest the amount of money that is supported by the cash flow, and the customers are captured. I mean, they can't buy the heat from anyone else. So they'll be captured for the next 40 years. They'll be paying a standing charge every month, and the rate of bad debt is very small. They're safe investments, but they will not grow. And the reason they won't grow is because, for the same reason, if your neighbour asks you if they can get rid of their boiler and connect to yours, it won't work because your boiler isn't big enough. Your boiler is sized to serve your house. And that's the same with a development-led district energy scheme. No developer is going to double the size of the energy centre just in case. The land is too valuable, they're going to build it to fit. But the lack of ability to grow means, in my opinion, that it's a myth. The answer to the question is that it is a myth, because the real growth in this sector is for the district-wide networks and cracking that. So that's a bit of a truth and myth, but ultimately, for anyone other than the energy companies on new networks, it has to be district-wide. It can't just be site-only.
My final truth or myth is to Andy and Carl, if you have any thoughts, that would be great. This is a kind of 3 points. The first truth or myth is any district heating system that uses gas-fired CHP to drive absorption chilling does not save carbon dioxide. That the use of gas-fired CHP is only to make money, and that the carbon dioxide savings are marginal at best. And then the final part to it is, as the electricity grid decarbonises, any purported CO2 savings from gas-fired CHP will reduce to zero, estimated sometime in the next 20 years. So what zero carbon heat source will be used in the future, and are investors being warned of this?
It's a very complicated one.
Clive, insightful question, by the way.
Okay. So can you just start again? Because I didn't quite get this. Can we just go down to one?
Let's keep it simple. Gas-fired CHP does not equal CO2 savings.
Gas-fired CHP does not equal CO2 savings. Well, it's a bit of a truth and myth, isn't it? I mean, it depends what you're using it for and what the gas is. I mean, if the gas is North Sea gas or the like, it's one thing. If it's gas that's low carbon gas that's being generated from somewhere else, it's a different value. So it could be either. I'm entirely convinced it's ever going to be a great thing in the longer term, but I wouldn't be doing it personally.
I consider it to be a myth. I do believe that when we're running our CHP to produce power and we utilize the waste heat and heat up our customers around the city so they can get their heat from our network instead of using their own local plant room, that will save us CO2 emissions. And that also goes for your question number 2, because we do have absorption chillers at CityGen. It's a tri-generation site, so the waste heat we got from the engine is used in the absorption chillers. We we cool our customers, and if they wouldn't have used our chill, they would have had to have either their own absorption chillers or just normal chill pumps. So I truly believe that at least our CHP helps to reduce the CO2 emissions in London.
I'd like to open it up to the floor, if I may. Just 2 housekeeping rules. One, we have a roving mic, so if you could wait for that. And second, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself. I saw the gentleman raise his hand here, and
Because I thought I might be able to help you on your last question.
please, that would be very helpful. Thank you.
My name is William Orchard, Orchard Apartments London Limited, and we've sort of specialised in district heating over the years. I sort of founded the Combined Heat Power Association. It's good to see Malmo here. Stuart Anderson was a great friend of mine. He was on the Committee for Underground Pipes. Anyway, back to your question about, which is a very fundamental one, about whether gas-fired CHP delivers any savings. And I think you have to look at the 2 different sectors. You have to look at the electricity sector and the heat sector. And I'm off to discuss in Petton with the EU the defects in their modelling of CHP. Because the way they model CHP is they analyse the saving by adding 1 unit of electricity to 1 unit of heat, and then calculating the saving across the 2 products. It's quite easy to see how flawed this is if you think of your large CCGT using its 30 degrees C heat to grow tomatoes. And if you then apply what I call perfect market principles to your modelling and look at what the marginal fuel burn is for the heat, the marginal fuel burn for the heat is 0. So where you decide to use the heat at 30 degrees centigrade, then it is a 0 carbon heat source. If, however, you decide to use it in CHP at a higher temperature, then the CHP is a virtual heat pump, which now Professor Mackay agrees with, which is a step forward. And in which case, you're looking at its coefficient of performance, how much electricity you use in the CHP to upgrade the heat. If you go for a low temperature heat system, 75 degrees centigrade, then you have a COP of between 12 and 14, which then delivers you your heat, which is double the figure that is in the current latest report. So if you're running with a COP of 14, then you have very low carbon heat, and that's the heat sector. As far as absorption chilling is concerned, that is a far more complex situation, because there you are actually using, you've got a process where you're using effectively a heat pump with its various losses in it, the coefficient of performance of that is low, probably 2, which means you need a lot of heat rejection driven by electricity. So when you actually look at those options, then yes, it is economic. If you have a city such as Västerås, which has an absorption-driven system for cooling the city. So the whole of this sector is a lot more complicated than a lot of people think. So if that's a help, I'll let someone else to say something now.
Thank you very much. The gentleman in the far. The gentleman at the back first.
Thank you. Ian Manders from CHPA, which is the Independent Trade Association for CHP and district heating industries. Michael Wright asked, how seriously is government taking heat networks? And I think the answer to that is in their heat strategy, we're talking about half our building stock that could be connected to heat networks in the UK. But the question was how we go about it. And the key thing, I think, probably as far as the industry is concerned, is the cost of capital of building schemes. And a report for government in 2009 from Query in Favour of Wadsworth said that interest rates need to be down towards 3.5% to make heat networks sufficiently cheap enough, effectively, really, to compete with gas. Now, since then, the economics have gone more our way, actually, the district heat network way. And one thing that the industry is looking at government is to see if there could be a form of state underwriting of the building of district heating schemes, of the capital cost of district heating schemes. And there is institutional finance out there which is looking for low-risk investments. But in return, the industry has to introduce a form of self-regulation, effectively, for government to support it in that way. And that's one thing that my association is working on at the moment, including a domestic customer heat protection scheme and various other ways that we can introduce forms of self-regulation, which could be a forerunner for state regulation later on.
That's excellent, thank you. The gentleman in front.
Right. Fintan Lyons from Frontline Energy and Environmental. We're involved in working with clients to use district heating networks and look at all the complexities of regulation and delivery. I've two observations. One is for Andy. The UTES system, it's absolutely, there's no doubt about it, it's absolutely fantastic, and if we could deploy it more around the UK and Ireland, it would be revolutionary, I think. But with existing housing, not with existing housing stock, but with existing commercial buildings, we're using different supply and return temperatures we're using typically higher temperatures on LPHW and on the chilled water systems. So that's an issue that I think can't be ignored because it would require retrofit within buildings. And the second question will be for Howard. You mentioned the 40-year capture. Basically, if you can build or develop a district heating network, you have essentially captured a market, be it whatever size it is. It's a limited market for 40 years. How do we encourage the developers of these schemes, the ESCOs, let's just say, for argument's sake, to look at incentivizing those guys to improve the efficiency of those schemes over the course of that period? Because various speakers have said the technology is going to change and improve. And for example, if you install a district heating network at the start, which relies on CHP and Trigen, for example, but then you begin to develop methodologies and economic models that enable you to use waste heat from computer rooms locally or air conditioning systems that you'd like to incorporate. They would need to be, obviously, those improvements would need to be financed. With the existing models as it stands, it doesn't seem that there's much incentive for us to do that.
Okay, so on the with the existing systems that we've got in our buildings, which tend to operate sort of at 6 degrees C supply, I think what tends to happen is that people just they don't do everything. So if you've got existing buildings, they tend to put in something that doesn't do all of it, which we seem to think is impure in some way. But you just leave it, do what you can for the most of the year. There's a significant period during the year which you can actually deal with it at slightly higher temperatures, and then just have something that reduces the temperature during the peaks. The approach has been taken where they tended to have existing buildings and then add them in. And then your new buildings, as you build them over time, you just build them with slightly higher temperature systems, which are generally being put in anyway, in my view. So.
Thanks. Alan?
In terms of, if I understood the question correctly, in terms of incentivising network operators to be innovative, is that essentially what the question is? If we put ourselves in a world of no regulation and no government incentives, because obviously regulation could force innovation, although most regulation is focused on customer pricing rather than innovation, and incentives can distort, but they can work, and that can lead to innovation. If you take both of those out, I think the only thing that will lead to innovation is economics. The only thing that will make a network connect to a heat supply to bring it in is a positive economic model. And I don't really foresee, every project we do is about satisfying stakeholders so that the economics work for every single one of them, because if they don't, no one does anything, and I don't think that's going to change. So on very contained networks, nothing's going to happen, because no one's going to give anyone any land. Well, local authority could, but then you could say that's government incentives. So no one's going to stretch a network that is off-site, so it's not limited to one ownership in terms of land. It's stretched. It has to be economics. So you have to find a way of making that connection that they need to make, whether it's to import or export, viable. I don't think there's any. If we can get there, if we can make viability without incentives, and then the incentives come in, then the world just gets easier. So I think the industry has to very much focus on viable economic solutions, because that's the only way. Also, you get the developers, by which I mean land developers. You get the large customers. That's the only way you get them, is to economically viable solutions, however hard that might be.
Just to add to that, if I'm the person engaging in ESCO, whether for my own heat consumption or procuring it for others, I can take two options, which aren't mutually exclusive. The first is that I have my stick and I put in concepts like best available techniques or best practical environmental obligations on them to ensure that they're continuing to invest. Because as we all know, I keep drawing analogies to electricity, water and gas. Every time the water industry puts their asset management plans in, part of it is how you're going to reinvest into your infrastructure. But the other is also to create a mechanism that contractually incentivises ESCOs to come back to you with propositions where they think they can make modifications that can create an economic return for them. And then that just becomes part of how you structure that depends on who owns the underlying asset. Because there are projects where the ESCO's got equipment they sort of just got economic possession, and others where they own it. In that scenario, it's not dissimilar to a construction contract variation regime. It's got similar ideas that the contractor's putting a proposal forward. There are additional considerations there, of course, which is pricing. So I would imagine for most ESCOs, they'll only propose something if they think it improves the efficiency of the asset, which means it reduces their costs. And I, as the counterparty to that arrangement, want to make sure that benefit is either passed on to myself or the customers who are being served by that. So you can create mechanisms. Whether they're actually going to be used in practice, a lot of those contractual mechanisms are less than 4 or 5 years old, so I don't think we've quite reached the natural life cycle point yet where people are going to implement them. but I think it's prudent to do so.
Can I just say one more related thing, which contradicts myself a little bit, but if you think back 10 years, we'd have been surprised if we went back 10 years to realise that now all developments in London of any scale, the developer's compelled to put district energy in. That was a big step. And that wasn't market forces, that is legislation, planning legislation saying you've got to do it. In my view, there's one extra small step that could be taken that would change a lot, and that's if, where viable, the developer was forced to take the network outside of their site. Even 100 metres, doesn't matter. If there's a school, as soon as a network comes off a site and it's no longer on that land, and if there's any of our developer clients in the room, I hope I'm not causing trouble, but if you come off the site, then it's no longer a site district, it's no longer a site network, it's a district network. And then you can look at the economics, because there are certain things like planning that can completely change things. The issue now is all of these networks being stuck on a site. As soon as some pipe comes off, you've got a whole opportunity.
Do you mind if I just let this gentleman ask a question and I'll come back to that?
Thank you very much. My name's Steve Pearce. I work at the Borough of Sutton with, amongst other people, Howard. Howard's explained our circumstances in terms of the landfill site and the ERF. So we're very keen to promote a district heat network. Firstly, primarily because the economics work. But the reason we're keen to promote it, the political reason we're keen to promote it, is to address fuel poverty, to generate local employment, as well as the environmental benefits that can be generated from that. And so much so that we're actually looking as an authority at investing in the network itself. What is exercising the members' minds at the moment is the governance issues associated with that and the various risks and benefits associated with that. So I'm interested in probably your view, Michael, and maybe others, on sort of the high level sort of pros and cons of various structures we might look at.
Okay. Entities in your position, whether public or private entities, often ask the question, how involved should I be in this? Should I be a shareholder in the venture? Or should I be a venture, whether it's an unincorporated or incorporated venture? Am I simply a facilitator? So like what the Homes and Communities Agency did. They didn't own any of the assets. They weren't. They were primarily landlord / encouraging others to take up the opportunity with Thamesway. To the extent you want to be more meaningfully involved, actually the considerations are dissimilar to any other investment. Am I going in there purely, so am I becoming a shareholder purely to have a seat at the table? I'm not putting money in, I don't want to take money out, but I want to be at the table, at board level, making decisions, because I feel I will have a greater say in how things develop than I would if I simply just had a contractual relationship and if I'm a local authority exercising my statutory powers. For others, they're looking far more broadly. They're looking at, actually, I want to make a financial investment in this, and your VARI's powers under Section 11, I think, of the Local Government Act allows you to do that. To give you that opportunity to take advantage of something that has both a commercial benefit, a social benefit. And then it raises the really interesting question whether you, like what Woking did, do I export my business, because it becomes a business, to other areas? There are so many other considerations, so I appreciate I'm not covering them all. But I'm pleased you're talking about that, because many stakeholders in your position over the last few years have shied away from having a more active interest in the ESCO and purely just a contractual arrangement. Part of that is we're in an economic downturn, cash is tight, and de-risking everything by outsourcing it all to somebody often makes sense at the moment. So it's good to hear.
I have a sort of EU.
Sorry, thank you.
We have a sort of EU Ecostara project looking at optimising CHP, and for that, the results coming out of it are that the temperature you need to go at is dictated by the domestic hot water temperature, where you have to achieve 60 degrees centigrade. So the scenario in our report is that you have this 75 degrees centigrade, which is the maximum, and with that temperature, we reckon that we will be able to retrofit the existing domestic sector buildings. Now, they are the largest potential heat load, and they are also the area which are most likely to be attractive to financiers, because the beauty of this sector is that you go to the end of the road, as they did in Odense in Denmark, where they serve very low density dwellings. If you followed Odense's principle, you'd heat the whole of Greater London, the sort of network they've got there. And they say to the people, now, we're bringing a heat network down this road. We know what you pay at the moment, and here's the deal for connecting. It'll take your building to code level 4, because you won't have to insulate anything if you supply you with a low carbon heat. Would you like to connect now at X or Y later on? The question is, what sort of structure could you put in so that people do not wish to disconnect? And what sort of structure would you put in so that it was very low risk on the investment in the pipework? And the solution that's come out of this project, which we're looking at, is a sort of limited liability partnership structure, where everyone who connects to the network, A, owns their